I have in my hands a study that could end magazine bans for good. This is an industry report. It's published by the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and it proves that there are 1 billion magazines owned by law-abiding Americans. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters because the Supreme Court said that if it's in common use, you cannot ban it. And this study here is indisputable proof of common use, and it's everything that we needed to end magazine bans nationwide for good. If you go to a gun store and you buy, say, a Glock 17 handgun, it's going to come standard with a 17-round magazine. If you buy a Springfield Armory XDM handgun, it's also going to come with a 20-round magazine. And of course, if you buy an AR-15 rifle, it's going to come with a 30-round magazine. These are some of the most commonly owned firearms in the country, and they are under major attack from the left. So we know what the left wants is to outright ban all semi-automatic firearms, full stop. It's what Joe Biden wants. He's said it over and over again. It's what the gun grabbers in Congress want. It's what the gun grabbers in your state legislatures want to do as well, regardless of whether you're in a red or a blue state. If your state has not banned guns, unfortunately, you cannot breathe easy. Because in the more purple states, or in states where they may not have the votes to actually ban guns, and they can't get that through the legislature, often they'll try to come at it another way, and they'll just ban the magazines. What we call standard capacity magazines, because they are standard capacity magazines, they call high capacity magazines. And they say nobody needs a magazine that's going to shoot 30 rounds. They say that because if they can get their foot in the door that way, then they can start rolling it back. Well, who needs a 20-round mag or a 15-round mag? In fact, you don't need a magazine that holds over 10 rounds. And many states have actually said that. Where does that end? It ends with you having to manually load one round at a time, Barney Fife style, into your gun, shoot it, and then load another. And you're going to be lucky if they let you do that. That is why this industry report from the National Shooting Sports Foundation is so important. Because in order to knock down these unconstitutional magazine bans in the courts and to prevent more states and the federal government from banning them, we have to prove just how common these magazines are. Why? Because according to the Supreme Court, if it's in common use for self-defense, it's hands-off for the government. And that's exactly what this study proves with sales numbers from the major manufacturers. And I'm going to go over a few of those numbers for you here now. So first, it gives us a total number of magazines sold, specifically between 1990 and 2021. That number, get ready for it, 963,772,000. That is almost 1 billion magazines. But there's more. That's just the grand total. Rifle magazines that hold 30 rounds and up total 448,369,000. Rifle magazines that hold over 10 rounds, so between 11 rounds and 29 rounds, total 60,386,000. Now, when it comes to pistol magazines, magazines that hold over 10 rounds, total 209,145,000. Many of the magazine bans that we are dealing with focus on magazines that hold over 10 rounds. And the total number, pistol and rifle, of magazines that hold over 10 rounds is 717 million. That means that the left wants to ban 74% of all magazines in circulation. Now again, before I get into just how that ends the left's case on magazine bans, there's one more thing I want to point out. This is a conservative estimate, and they go on to explain that. I'm going to read this for you here. Not all magazine manufacturers that support and supply firearm manufacturers and the consumer market responded to the survey and provided data. Therefore, the results are a conservative estimate. And they go on to point out this, and this is key, because this kills one of the big arguments that the left has already made in our cases. Military and law enforcement sales were not counted. Y'all, this is the civilian market. And that is one of the things that we've run into in our cases. They say, well, the numbers that you're giving us, that includes military. That doesn't count. That's not civilians. That's not your normal law-abiding American. Oh, yeah, it is. And we're talking 1 billion. Now, let's talk about how these numbers translate into game over for the left. Every law that regulates gun rights or that bans guns has to pass a text, history, and tradition test according to the Supreme Court's Bruen ruling. In other words, a court can only uphold a magazine ban law if it's consistent with our nation's historical tradition. Now, we know magazines have never been banned. We know that. The case could end right there. But the Supreme Court went on to say this: "We found it fairly supported by the historical tradition of prohibiting the carrying of dangerous and unusual weapons, that the Second Amendment protects the possession and use of weapons that are in common use at the time." And they went on to say, drawing from this historical tradition, we explained there that the Second Amendment protects only the carrying of weapons that are those in common use at the time, as opposed to those that are highly unusual in society at large. If a weapon is in common use for lawful purposes, such as self-defense, you cannot ban them, period. It doesn't get much more common than 1 billion of these magazines that the left is trying so hard to ban. This industry report is the last nail in the coffin for magazine bans. All right, now here's the cool thing. Justice Alito said in a concurring opinion in Caetano versus Massachusetts, which was a case about stun guns, the pertinent Second Amendment inquiry is whether stun guns are commonly possessed by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes today. The more relevant statistic is that hundreds of thousands of tasers and stun guns have been sold to private citizens, who it appears may lawfully possess them in 45 states. And then he goes on to point out that approximately 200,000 civilians owned stun guns as of 2009. And then he says this: "While less popular than handguns, stun guns are widely owned and accepted as a legitimate means of self-defense across the country. Massachusetts' categorical ban of such weapons therefore violates the Second Amendment." If 200,000 constitutes common use, upwards of 1 billion absolutely destroys magazine bans. Full stop. And it is going to be impossible to ignore these manufacturer numbers and to continue to argue that magazines are not in common use. Here's what we're going to do with this study. We're going to take it and we're going to go to the Colorado District Court, where our case against the Colorado magazine ban is pending, and we're going to hand it in. We had an expert who testified that magazines are in common use, and the information he gave the court should have been enough. But they found a way to discredit it, and that is actually a tactic we run into a lot. Leftist judges tend to throw out our expert witnesses. That's kind of one of their tactics, and that's what happened with our expert witness testifying that magazines were in common use. So they gave us time to come up with an alternative plan, and this study is our alternative plan. So what we're going to do is we're going to present this study to the court. It makes our case in indisputable terms, straight from the manufacturers, that magazines are in common use. And then we will wait for a ruling. This isn't just about Colorado, though. This is going to be indispensable ammunition for every single magazine ban challenge out there, and there are a lot. We ourselves have 4 other ones. We're challenging both assault weapons bans and magazine bans in Connecticut, in Massachusetts, in Illinois, in Hawaii. But those are just the ones our organization is involved in. There are a number of others all over the United States: California, Rhode Island, Delaware, just to name a few. Now, we would love to have your help in the fight. We cannot do it without the support of gun owners like you. So if you'd like to help us fight, I'd invite you to click the link in the description below and make a contribution to our legal war chest. And we will keep you posted as we continue the battle against magazine bans.